Hi, I'm Chris. This is Finding God at Work. In our current series, Imagining Work, we're asking a question: what story about work am I living in? Because there are lots of stories about work, but we want to live inside the story about work that God is telling on the pages of the Bible. So right now we're looking at key images from the Bible, and today's image is friend. When we think about friends in the workplace, we often think of coworkers, maybe particular people that we connect with that we feel like are helpful to us in terms of the work itself and emotionally. And this kind of gets at two sides of the coin with friendship. And we could ask it in terms of what does it mean to love somebody else? Because at some level, we know that our friends love us. They care about us. And a philosophical definition of love, this has been used by C.S. Lewis, by Dallas Willard, by others, is to will the good of the other person. So the person you're loving, you're willing their good. And that may be different than how we tend to use the word love. So Dallas Willard would joke, like, when somebody says they love chocolate cake, like, no, you don't love chocolate cake. You're going to eat chocolate cake. You're not willing the good of chocolate cake. Chocolate cake, if it had consciousness, would be afraid of you, right? When you love somebody, you're not just using them for your purposes, like you're using a piece of cake to satisfy your appetite for delicious chocolatey goodness. You're seeking that person's good. You're willing their good. You're choosing to promote what is in their best interest as you have opportunity. But then when we think about how do we actually seek the good of other people, there's two sides to that coin. And this is an oversimplification, but we can think of it, particularly in the work context, as we either seek their good through productivity or we seek their good through presence. And we can think of examples of both of these things. So on the productivity side, there's a great example from this book about personality called The Road Back to You by Ian Morgan Cron and Suzanne Stabile. And they're talking about a personality type that isn't always the most affectionate, somebody who maybe doesn't give you a lot of hugs all the time. And here's an example they give of how a father might show love. What, you wanted more hugs? Remember how, after that hurricane, yours was the only house in the neighborhood with power and heat because years earlier your dad brought a backup generator and regularly checked to make sure it was properly serviced and fueled? Sounds like a hug to me. So this gets at that productivity side of love, right? Maybe you don't have the most affectionate dad in the world, but he's sure as heck going to make sure that your home is taken care of in really practical ways. And that really is a way to show care for someone. And obviously, in the work context, we experience this as well. At work, the first way we can be a good friend to our coworkers is by doing a good job at our job. That's what helps our coworkers in the practical sense of the work they're trying to get done during the workday as well. And sometimes somebody might be really emotionally attuned to us, but we actually don't feel loved because of the way that they're not able to respond to the practical things. So I remember an experience where a friend of mine, he was really tuned into me when I was having a bad day. He was emotionally present. He was like, oh man, I'm so sorry you're going through that, right? But that friend also did not respond to an email I had sent him about an urgent work priority. And so later that day, I was really frustrated with that friend. I was like, you know, I love that you're so empathetic, but like what would really help me today is if you reply to that email in a timely manner, right? Now you're getting a sense of a little bit of my personality in that as well. Part of what helps me feel loved is when people are doing the work, when we're pulling together as a team. That actually literally helps me feel loved by my team members. And so that productivity side is an important side of how we promote the good of somebody else. Is we actually need to do our work in the workplace. We need to do our job well. But of course, there is the other side of the coin. And that's that sometimes we really need the hug. Sometimes we need somebody who's going to be empathetic, who's going to be attuned to us. And often our friends at work are those people who can tune into us and who can understand what's going on for us. How is this person feeling today? And one hallmark of people like this is that they are willing to interrupt productivity for the sake of presence. Somebody has a lot of things on their to-do list. They have a lot of things that they need to get done, but they're willing to interrupt that productivity in order to pay attention to the person in front of them. And so there's a tension here between productivity and presence. If you take the time, the few minutes to really tune into somebody, maybe you will reply to that email a little bit later than you otherwise would. And so it takes discernment in the moment to know how long should you take to see how somebody's doing, to check in with them. But we need both of these things. In order to love our coworkers well, we need to love them by doing our jobs well, productivity, and we need to love them by being present to them, being empathetic, seeing what's really going on with them. And we both need these kind of friends at work too. This might be something that's a good exercise for reflection for you. Think about who in your workplace loves you really well by being productive, and who in your workplace loves you really well by being present. And maybe if you're lucky, you have somebody in your workplace who loves you well in both ways. And I think that's what we should aspire to be people who love other people in both ways, where we love people well by being productive, we love people well by being present. That's what makes us true friends of our friends at work. But in order to do that, we need our need for friendship to be met more deeply. And ultimately, that need is met by our friendship with Jesus. Jesus is a friend to us in the middle of our workday, and he's a friend in both ways. This might be novel for you to think about, but Jesus is really productive. Jesus is good at getting things done. And Jesus is also an expert in your field. Whatever your field is, whether you're driving a bus or designing a machine or operating a machine or teaching a classroom, Jesus knows everything there is to know about that. And Jesus can help you with the productivity goals of your workplace. He can give you the insight, the wisdom that you need to get the job done. But of course, Jesus is also present with us. We think of the final words of the Great Commission in Matthew 28, when Jesus says, "Behold, I am with you always." Jesus really meant it. He really is with us always. That means he's with us in the details of our workday. And it's one thing to know that, to know the theological fact that Jesus is present with us. It's another thing to remember it, to bring Jesus' presence into our conscious awareness during our workday. And so the question is, how can we do that? How can we bring Jesus' presence before our mind, before our heart, in the nitty-gritty moments of our day? The traditional Christian phrase for this is practicing the presence of God. That's a title of a book by a French monk named Brother Lawrence from several centuries ago, The Practice of the Presence of God. But it's also found its way into many different contexts. And I just want to talk about it in a really practical way. How do we bring the presence of Jesus before our mind at work? One thing is that boring and repetitive tasks can be our friend, right? They can help us in terms of remembering that Jesus is with us because they allow us the mental space to think about something else besides the task at hand. When you're doing a boring and repetitive task, you have that sort of back of the mind space free. Great example of this is a woman I know named Lindsay. She is a gastrointestinal tech at a colonoscopy clinic, and they rotate the duty of cleaning off the colonoscopy probes after the fact. So it is a literally crappy part of the job, so that's why they rotate it from person to person. But Lindsay told me that she has had the richest prayer times at work when it's her turn to wash those colonoscopy probes, because it's a boring, yucky, repetitive task. It doesn't take that much mental effort to do the work of the cleaning. And so she has this freedom while she's doing that to pray, to be aware of the presence of Jesus, to pray for her coworkers, to pray about whatever's on her mind and her heart that day. Similarly, I think of someone I met named Larry, who's an owner-operator driving trucks. And so he works in logistics, he does transportation, and he says that he will pray with other people while he's driving because, the task of driving doesn't take all of his mental energy. He'll call a friend who he knows is free at the same time, and they'll pray over the phone while he's driving. So you can think about your own workplace. What are those opportunities you have when you have boring or repetitive tasks? How can you bring the presence of Jesus before your mind during those moments? And someone who's been a leader in this that's been helpful to me is a missionary named Frank Laubach. He worked in the early 20th century in India and in the Philippines. He's primarily known for his work in literacy, helping people learn how to read. But he also proclaimed the gospel and helped people become followers of Jesus. But one thing that he practiced in his own prayer life is what he came to call the game with minutes. And his question was, how often can I turn my mind toward God while I'm even doing other tasks? And so eventually in his game with minutes was, can I bring God into my conscious awareness for 1 second out of every minute, right? 60 times per hour. Now, that may seem really intense. Like I'm nowhere close to that in my own life with God. I maybe a couple of times per hour, maybe every 15 minutes on a good day, I'm consciously remembering that God is with me. But this isn't meant to be something that inspires anxiety of like, oh, I got to remember God all the time or else I'm doing a bad job. this is something that we can just lean into because Jesus is with us. We can receive his presence with us while we're working on other tasks. I think about how my wife Katie, who's in grad school at the moment, she will be working on her homework in the living room while I'm reading a book or typing away on a blog post or something. And I'm not primarily focused on Katie's presence, but I'm aware of her presence even while I'm reading my book. I'm aware of her presence even while I'm writing my blog post. I know that she's there with me in the room. And I might, if I read something really funny, I'm reading some Jane Austen novels right now, and sometimes a character just has like a really witty line. I'll pause and I'll turn to Katie and I'll read the line to her, interrupt her homework for a bit, for a moment of laughter. Well, that can be what our relationship with God is like during the workday. Jesus is present to us, and we can just welcome his presence, remembering that he's with us during the day. And that allows him to truly be our friend. He is that good friend who's with us in the productivity of the workday, and he's with us by his presence in the middle of the workday. And when we receive the friendship of Jesus in that way more and more, we can become a good friend like him to all the people around us. Lord Jesus, you are the true friend. You walk with us in our workday. You go before us, and you're right there ready to be productive with us, to be present with us in all the tasks that we're tackling, in all the relationships that we're facing, in all the ways that we're trying to be a good friend to the people around us. We ask that you would be our friend first, so we can rest in you, rest in your love, and really love the people around us. Do your work in us as we do our work with you. Amen.
Thanks for listening. Finding God at Work is a production of Mission Central, a ministry based in Aurora, Illinois, dedicated to forming Christians for mission in everyday life. You can subscribe to the podcast wherever you listen to this episode to get 10 minutes of teaching on faith and work every Tuesday and Thursday. To get resources to go deeper with each podcast series, read our blog, and get info about upcoming courses on faith in the workplace, go to our website, missioncentral.church.